Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. Welcome to the Clutter Fairy Weekly for September 15th, 2020. I'm your co-host, Ed Gumnick, and I'm speaking with Gayle Goddard, professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas.
Hi, everybody. The Clutter Fairy Weekly is our webcast and podcast where we talk about all things organizing every week, and we totally let this be driven by what you have to say on all of our social media channels. So we really appreciate that you go out there and comment because we mine those comments for your topics today.
If you're joining us in the Zoom meeting for the first time, you can share your comments and questions via the chat, and I'll make sure Gayle addresses them before we move on to the next topic. And you can use the raise hand feature to let me know if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment yourself via audio or video. We're streaming live on Facebook, so you can also share your questions and suggestions there, and I'll relay them to Gayle. And during the live webcast every Tuesday, you can talk to us directly by calling 669-900-6833. Use meeting ID 993-419-863 to join the meeting. A special welcome to our 700 podcast subscribers. We're very excited that we're getting some traction as a podcast, and we'd like to ask you to leave a review for us in iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that will help us grow our audience.
We really appreciate that you're here.
Yeah. Let's get to our topic. There's a metaphor, and it's standing there in the room behind Gayle. There's a metaphor that we've talked about at least a couple of times before in our meetings and webcasts. I'll bet you've all heard this one. Question: what's the best way to eat an elephant? Answer: one bite at a time. As we prepared for today's discussion of habits and behaviors, we ran across a fresh take on the eating an elephant advice from a website called The Introvert Entrepreneur. The founder of that site, Beth Bulow, says, the first thing to do is reflect on your relationship to the elephant. She suggests taking a look at your goal, your project, or the obstacle that you're facing to make sure, first of all, that it's really yours.
And that's very much in the spirit of what we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, reflecting on the life that we want to have and on the emotional roots of our collecting or keeping too much stuff. So we're starting from the assumption that you've now taken a good hard look at that elephant and determined that it is in fact your elephant to eat. Today we're going to discuss what it means to eat the elephant one bite at a time, and that's all about habits. So habits are patterns of behavior that have become mostly or even completely involuntary. For better or for worse, we stick to our habits without giving them much thought. We'll talk today about 2 categories of habits. Just as we try to avoid talking about clutter in terms of right and wrong, we're going to steer clear of the phrase bad habits. We don't want to talk about bad habits. So we're going to talk about habits that work for you and habits that don't. Habits that support the life that you want and those that distract or block you from getting what you really want. We'll talk first about the habits that don't support you. These are routines or patterns of behavior that lead to bringing in or holding on to too much stuff. For each type of habit that doesn't work, we'll suggest one or more useful habits you might cultivate to replace it or mitigate the problem habit. So the first habit that doesn't support the life you want is buying on impulse. Impulse buying means purchasing anything that you didn't set out to buy. It's a habit that's fueled by novelty and excitement. We get a hit of dopamine when we pick up the magazine in the checkout line, or when we first see that cool thing that now we suddenly have to have. Instead, cultivate the habit of always shopping from a list and with a budget. If an item isn't on your list and in your budget, then have a plan for how to handle the impulsive urge. Keep a second list where you can jot down the name of the item you feel drawn to buy. You might find that when you look at that second list later, the emotional appeal has faded and you don't actually want that thing the way that you thought you did in the heat of the moment. Many people keep a grocery list, but they don't have the habit of making lists for any of the other shopping that they do. We suggest you shop from a list for every kind of shopping you do. If your list says you're looking for 3 blouses, a pair of jeans, and a package of socks, you might feel a little more resistance when you're tempted by that cute jacket or an irresistible pair of shoes. Another related or better approach is to cultivate the habit of setting a waiting period for purchases. Remember, if it's worth having, it's worth waiting for. Experts on budget even suggests tying the length of the waiting period to the price of the purchase. For example, plan to wait at least a day before you buy anything that costs up to $100, and wait a week before buying anything that costs up to $1,000, and so on. You might want to wait, 3 months before you buy a car, for instance. The next habit that doesn't support the life you want is shopping for bargains. Many of us live for the thrill of a sale price. Retailers put a lot of time and effort into calculating the optimal sale price that we'll find nearly impossible to resist. But remember that Clutter Fairy mantra: a bargain is only a bargain if you need what you're buying. Instead, cultivate a habit of looking first at the real value of the things you're contemplating buying. Will you use it? Do you love it? Will it last? Do you have a place for it? What's the true cost? And we're going to talk more about that in the coming weeks, discussing the true cost of things and about more questions to ask as you're contemplating a purchase. But fundamentally, the habit we're suggesting you cultivate is to replace the emotional response to a possible bargain with a calm, careful judgment on how this item fits your bigger picture.
Gayle, let me interrupt you for a question already.
Okay.
Charlie, who's with us for the first time, asked suggestions on list format, tools or paper. What do you think? And my answer to that, I'm a mostly Mac and iOS user. I use the Notes app, and in the newer versions of Notes, you can synchronize notes among your phone and your desktop and your laptop or iPad. And I like that I can use Notes to create checklists. So that's particularly great for shopping, because as you check the things off, they fall to the bottom of the list, and only the things that are left remain on the list.
Oh, that's convenient.
Yeah, it's
That's
very nice.
useful.
And it's because it syncs among the different devices, it's easy for me to make my list while I'm sitting at my computer and then shop from it on my phone.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think the only other thing I would add here is there's a million list making apps out there. And so the question is, do you have a preference for electronic solutions, or do you have a preference for paper solutions? And truly, you should use the one that you're likely to use, you're willing to populate. If it's a struggle to make the list, then you don't want to do it. So you really need to go with your personal preferences, because neither one is better than the other, truly. It's just whichever one you feel inclined and happy to do. And if you do decide that you want to make paper lists, then I would at least go to a small pad that you can carry around with you, so that it's, a little ring booklet or some kind of little pad or something that you can write on and carry in your purse, bag, pocket, whatever. And so that all of your lists are sort of in one place. If paper doesn't appeal, then you get to go hunting for, like Ed described, the list solution that works on your computer and your phone, basically, so you can make the list while you're at home and then use the list while you're out. And telephone is the easiest way now to make sure that you have access to everything on the go. And so unless you're carrying some kind of pad, those small portable solutions lend themselves to walking around the store with your phone in your hand looking at your list. So whichever one works for you. Okay, so the third unsupportive habit is shopping as therapy or entertainment. Shopping while you're feeling bad or down can lead to rationalizing impulse buys and ignoring the values that guide you in happier moments. Trying for that dopamine hit when you're feeling depressed is an attempt at self-care, but it's a flawed one because it's temporary, fleeting, and expensive. Plus, it doesn't actually address the real issue of your feelings. Better to try and process your feelings in a more constructive way, with a trusted friend or with a therapist instead. Go for a more substantive improvement rather than blocking out your feelings momentarily. And some people are tempted to overspend even or especially when they're feeling great. They try to reinforce the high with that dopamine rush we mentioned earlier. Not the most supportive way to celebrate, actually. If you recognize that you're an emotional shopper, again, shopping from a list and a budget might help you keep your buying in check. And for added protection, consider the habit of only shopping when a friend or family member is available to go with you, and not the friend or family member that encourages you to buy. You want to take the friend or family member who's going to have a calm, rational discussion about whether you actually need that or not. Being able to get a second opinion on the spot can help curb the tendency to make emotional purchases. I can't rely on my bead friends to prevent me from buying beads. They just encourage me to buy more. So you have to be careful about who you choose to be your partner and verbal brakes on your impulse buying. Okay, so the next one, we'll call the next point returning to the scene of the crime. I want you to try an exercise here and complete this sentence. I always leave the store with more than I plan to buy when I go to fill in the blank store. You go to Target for a tube of toothpaste and some potato chips, and by the time you leave, they've talked you into signing up for a red card to pay for the $300 worth of stuff you haul to the cash register. Everybody has that store that seems specifically designed to appeal to them, and that is the store that makes the most impulse shopping happen. The nature of habits is that they have triggers, and triggers are actions or conditions or circumstances that set us off on habitual behavior. If you want to shift the habit, one way to do so is to avoid your triggers. So if you can't restrain yourself once you set foot in a used bookstore, then don't go to the used bookstore. Instead, stick strictly to your book shopping list and shop online, if that helps you avoid the trigger. Different people are triggered by different settings. You might have no problem in Target, but you go crazy when you walk inside Michael's or Payless or Costco. Pay attention to which places trigger overspending or impulse buying habits for you, and don't go to those places without a trusted companion, or at least leave the Target red card at home. Okay, so we focused so far about habits around bringing home too much stuff. Let's talk a little bit about habits related to keeping too much stuff, or habits that keep us stuck in our clutter. So the first example of this is accepting that clutter is your default state. This attitude is more a habit of thought than a habitual behavior. You feel overwhelmed, so you fall into the habit of saying to yourself, I've always been this way, I'll always be this way, there's nothing I can do about this, this is who I am. But if you've been listening to us for a while, we hope you're at least beginning to believe that your clutter is not who you are. To counter this habit of thought, we suggest that you replace it with one that better serves you in the life you want. One way you can do that is the practice of story editing that we introduced around the new year. Rewrite the story of your life as you presently experience it into the life that you want to have. Then summarize key points of your rewritten story as mantras that you can recite. For example, one of your key points might be, I maintain a clean kitchen and I enjoy cooking for my family every day. Or I make beautiful paintings in my comfortable, clean studio. Or my clothes are organized and my closet is tidy. We talked earlier about triggers in the context of avoiding the conditions or places that set off the habits we want to avoid. But this is a good time to talk about using triggers to cultivate new habits. One of the best ways to establish a constructive new habit is to connect it to another behavior that's already habitual. For instance, when you come home from work and take off your work outfit, use the trigger of undressing as a reminder to say your new mantra, my clothes are organized and my closet is tidy, as you hang up the items of clothing that can be worn again and you place the dirty clothes into the laundry hamper instead of discarding them all on a chair or the bed or the floor. Here's the second choice, putting things down instead of putting them away. This is a pretty obvious point, but it's much too easy to fall into the habit of finishing the activity or a task, then setting down the tool or material or the book or the dish or the piece of paper on the nearest convenient horizontal surface. One way to stop doing that counterproductive habit, and pun intended, hello, is to cultivate as strict a policy of a place for everything and everything in its place as you can. Assigning a place for every object that occupies your space is one component of a set of related habits you can cultivate for reducing the accumulation of clutter. Another key related habit is to then make use of the places you've assigned. It may not seem like much to put the coupon organizer back in its drawer in the kitchen when you come home from grocery shopping, but you'll save a tremendous amount of time and effort as you learn to practice this habit a dozen or 50 or 100 times a day. A third related habit you can cultivate is to recognize the things you're holding on to that you just can't seem to find a place for. If it never seems to get put away, maybe it doesn't belong in your space, and maybe it's time to let it go. Number 3 is saving things to do later. This is the habit of ignoring the accumulation of clutter on the grounds that in some elusive later, we'll have more time than we have right now. Here, we'd like to invoke a rule that comes from David Allen and the Getting Things Done book. If you can clean up a mess, organize a small collection of items, or put something away in less than a minute or two, then you should do it right now. And speaking of that distant and mysterious later that we're tempted to wait for, here's what we have to talk about cultivating a daily decluttering habit, or whole set of them. Consider making a checklist of 3 or 5 or 10 problem areas in your home. For example, the mail that piles up on the kitchen counter, the towels on the floor of the bathroom, the toys that come out of the children's bedroom but don't go back. Set aside a time every day to run down your checklist and take care of one item in each problem area. Number 4, saying yes when we ought to say no. This is about accepting anything you get for free as a gift, a hand-me-down, a long-term loan, a curbside find, and so on. Even things that seem to be free come with a cost in the time that you spend maintaining or storing or cleaning them, or the space and mental bandwidth they take up. Cultivate the habit of saying no thank you to free stuff that doesn't fit your goals, your desires, or the aesthetic that you've chosen for your space. So we're at a pause point if anybody has some questions for me now about this concept of habits.
Lots of people chimed in with suggestions about shopping list apps, including Google Keep, which I think they have a version of Google Keep for pretty much every operating
For
system.
everything, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a Google Keep for iPhones, but I know that I know there is on Android. And Maida mentioned an app called Shop, which was she thinks free for the iPhone.
Okay.
And then
That's one I haven't heard of before.
several people talked about, on the subject of stores that are triggers. Several people chimed in on Tammy's mention of the dollar store.
Oh, God. Because the name implies that it's a bargain. Right off the bat, man. Oh, my gosh. And how can you not?
And and Anya said so many items in dollar stores are worth just a few cents. It really is kind of a little bit of it's a false value.
It's just an accumulation of stuff. And oh my God, you really, like that's the whole process of the bargain, right? Like I got something and it was a steal and therefore that makes it cool, except that then you have a bunch of shrapnel in your house that you really don't need, right? So I would even go to the dollar store. I mean, if you're trying to, make the most of your money and, get the best bang for your buck and whatever. And if you want to start at the dollar store, start your shopping there to see what you can buy to meet your needs before you go to Target or Costco or whatever, fine. But you take that list in there with you and go looking for things that will suit your needs on your list. And don't just go in there and randomly go, oh, look, here's another of the 400,000 things in the store that costs $1 that makes it so cheap. No. Because yes, they're useful and yes, they're cheap, and that doesn't change the fact that you don't need them. I think another really big one is Costco. I think people are seriously triggered by Costco because They make packages that are larger than you can get in regular stores, so it makes some of the stuff that you buy at Costco, the price per unit is less. But then you end up with a mayonnaise jug that's designed to serve as a restaurant, and you will never get to the end of the mayonnaise before it curdles into something, that's a science experiment. So I know that Costco is, all of these stores have their own process for drawing you in, selling you on the cool stuff, and suggesting that you need to have it. And there are stores for which you are their target market. Like, they design it with you in mind. And so those are always going to be the stores that trigger you to go nuts and buy too much, and you always find tons of things. And so I would seriously limit your trips to whatever store that is that you feel like you're their best and most perfect shopper. And I wouldn't hardly ever go by yourself, because then you can just sort of space out and wander around and come back to the checkout counter with 5 baskets full of stuff. And then take your list in, take your buddy in, and only go when you absolutely have to go, and make sure you're really clear. Like, study your list before you go, because they have designed the store to tempt you off your list, and you just need to know that going in. What else is happening out there?
Elke, who is with us on Facebook, said the bookshop. That's the trigger place, but not anymore, because I have a book wish list and give myself €1 for every 100 pages I actually read in a jar, and I'm only allowed to buy new books with money from the jar.
Awesome! That is awesome! I love that you tied it to, you read 100 pages and then you put money in the jar. You're like paying yourself for good behavior. That is so great. That's like the book buying version of, the swear jar. I think that is awesome. Yay! I like that plan. It's a good one.
And then one of our participants in Zoom said, I make it a habit to check the per unit price when I'm looking at a bargain. Some things, bargain in quotes, some things in the dollar store are higher on a per ounce or per item basis, but some are definitely lower. It's a challenge.
Well, and I'm sure that they, part of what they're doing, their gimmick is everything costs $1, right? So they're going to create a package unit that gets their price down to the pricing that they promise. And they may have to make some compromises about, you may not get that you're getting it's not that you're getting the lowest price per unit, it's that they're willing to provide you with packaging that costs $1 instead. Like, they get the items down to only $1's worth. And so, yeah, you may end up paying more. And so it's all an illusion, right? That's just their gimmick. So you're the one that has to be paying attention to, do you really have to have this? And is this really a good price? And being really conscious about shopping takes some work, and it isn't always entertaining. Unconscious shopping, where you wander around the store in a daze and randomly pluck things off and put them into the cart without thinking about it very hard. Oh, that's cool. I've done that. You space out, you're tired, and you wander around and you just go into a blank stare. That is the enemy of decluttering your house. And that is not going to get you where you want to go. And shopping has to become a conscious activity again. And it's hard. And it's hard when everything in our society supports and maintains catching your attention, getting you to buy it in the moment without thinking whether or not you can afford it. And a lot of times that involves getting out your credit card and using your credit card. And I think this is why we have to interrupt our knee-jerk responses to what they're trying to trigger. Because if you don't, you end up with a bunch of credit card debt for a bunch of stuff that you then have to take to Goodwill later because you don't need it. The end. The lecture on shopping.
Well, and a lot of the sources I read about habits related to collecting stuff ended up in conversations about budget, and many places suggest take cash, just get the cash you need for the purchases you anticipate.
And
And
that's straight out of the, who's the guy that does the
Dave Ramsey is
yes.
one of them.
Yes, that's straight out of Dave Ramsey's playbook, right? Like if you don't have cash in your hand to pay for it, you can't buy it. And that's designed to improve your cash flow, making you buy things that you actually need versus wasting money on things that you don't. If you're trying to get out of debt, if you're trying to slow down your credit card spending, then, making cash be the way that you buy stuff will shut you down in a hurry, because the credit card companies are perfectly happy for you to spend yourself into bankruptcy. They don't care. And so you have to be the one that says, I can't really, this is not in my budget this month. I cannot go and spend a bunch of money on this crap, because then I'm going to have to get out the credit card to do it, and I need to stop. And I do that about beads. I used to buy with credit, and I don't do that anymore. I show up with cash, and if when my cash runs out, then I don't get to buy anymore. And it's helped me a lot, be much more conscious about, I could take every bead in the store and call it cool and bring it home with me, but that is not the best use of my money. So we're going to, use a cash filter, and that will help you a lot, actually. It'll help you stick to a budget.
Diane on Facebook said one positive of the pandemic is that it has greatly reduced my impulse shopping or shopping as entertainment.
Right? Because you can't go to the store because it feels like a death-defying act now. So, right? Like it changed. Now you have to go to the grocery store. You go to a store when you absolutely need something, and you consolidate your trips, and you get in and out as fast as possible because it doesn't feel safe. And I often wonder now, because it's been months, how people's, like, they've been completely interrupted from that. It's so easy. I can just run to the store and entertain myself some more. And now that process has been completely interrupted. And I'm wondering how many people really miss it that bad, and how have they been able to replace it with things that they find more appealing. And I'll be curious to see, as people sort of settle into this, how their behavior has been permanently interrupted. Like we were all sitting around tapping our toes in the beginning, waiting to be able to get back to normal and do things the same way that we've always done them. And I think the length of this issue has meant that we've had to actually retool and redesign new ways to cope and deal and interact and shop and be with family and all those things. And so I think some of those processes are going to end up being more popular instead of less. They're going to be better than what you were doing before. You're going to like it better, and you're going to keep them. We won't ever go back to exactly the way that we were doing it all before. That's just my theory.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is the situation has forced me to do more meal planning.
So that you're not in the store all the time.
Yeah. And you can't, in the past, I've been a little more inclined to sort of think of things the day before, or even the day that I plan to cook or serve. And then I would, make that trip to the store for just half a dozen items.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's just not practical. So I plan ahead more. I think of, what are 3 or 4 meals that I will serve this week.
And go get stuff for all of them at once.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and the people that have been using the grocery apps, they're having to plan their meals in order to order what they need, because they don't want to go in the store at all. And so they have to be very careful that they get all the pieces that they need for what they're going to make. And so you really have to be more conscious about meal planning too. And it's just that, we have to be more conscious about shopping all the way around. And I think that is one thing that has been indelibly changed to some degree, I think, because of this pandemic. And more to the better, right? If we're not spending the same kind of money and we're not doing it in the same kind of way, it's going to change how much we shop. And frankly, we were kind of spinning out of control about it, about shopping. So we might as well do it a different way now. I think it's time for a change, right? And we don't, if we kept on doing it exactly the way that we're doing it, we would just continue to fill our houses with stuff. It's part of the reason why I have a job, because so many people have shopped themselves into a house that's full of things that they don't need because they could, because it was easy, because it was designed to catch their attention, because it seemed like a bargain, because. And all of those triggers have been interrupted for the time being, and that's a good thing. And now we're all like trying to dig our houses out and give all that stuff back away again, make it disappear. So, nobody wants to work that hard to empty their house and then turn around and fill it back up again. And I think this is part of what we're striving for. If you're coming to this channel, it's because you are trying to clear out your space and make it something that is easier and more pleasant to live in, generally.
A viewer we'll call 924 says, I'm doing more gardening, exercising, and Zooming than in-person shopping, but find myself going to Amazon to just look, in quotation marks, when it's late at night.
Yeah.
Dangerous.
Yeah, it is dangerous. So Amazon has that wish feature, right? So you can put things on the list. They have a built-in list function. And, I wouldn't buy anything late at night. Maybe you want to say that you're not like, she can't buy until she has money to put in a jar. You can't buy at night on Amazon. You can only put it in the list. And so if you put it in the list, then, when you've gone to bed and you're more rested and you're not stressed out, or you're not spacing out and you're alert, then you can get up in the morning and look at your list and go, those 37 things I put on the list are not really things that I want. So it's just like we said, putting in a pause. So if you find yourself shopping late at night, like people that eat late at night, right? You need a pause that will interrupt your process. And so don't hit buy, just put it on a list and then go to bed. I mean, it's fun to go look at stuff. It's like, when you look at Amazon online, it's the equivalent of flipping a catalog and looking at the catalog, right? Like, it's fun to look at stuff. It's mindless and it's relaxing and it's spacing out, and you're trying to let your brain rest by just sort of flipping and looking at pictures. It's the equivalent of scrolling through Facebook and looking at stuff going by. I mean, it's just a restful thing to do while you're tired and at the end of your day. And the trick is to just not hit buy at that point in time, to save it for later. And then later, you can be more judicious about your purchases. There's lots popping down there. I see the chat popping like mad.
Yeah. Lorraine mentioned the Amazon wish list or save for later list can only hold 600 items. That seems like a good cap.
Yeah, if you manage to break the Amazon list, then it's time for you to go do some editing, right? Well, I have lots of friends that tell me they put it in the wish list and then they go back a week later and they're scrolling through looking for something and they see that thing go by and they're like, I don't want that, and they can delete it. So, you can have a list.
Well, and
600 items, that's a lot.
Charlie mentioned techie approaches to stop yourself from the late night shopping habit, about configuring your internet connection on your router or using parental controls to lock yourself out. And I've seen there are applications for the Mac that you can get that limit your access to certain applications at certain times.
Ooh. Well, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I've heard that. Yeah. So it's like you can go in and say, I can't get on Amazon between the hours of 9 and midnight or something, right?
Mostly they're geared toward productivity. So it's, don't let me on Facebook between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. or things like that.
Yeah.
And that, if that helps you, that's great. But that's sort of, trying to apply a technological substitute for cultivating a habit that works for you.
Right.
Another way to look at it is it's using a technological assist to break an unproductive or unconstructive habit.
Mhm. Mhm. And really what you're doing in that moment is relaxing. Like it's some version of you're trying to be winding down your day, you're trying to not be looking at email and be doing something productive. You're just trying to do something that's mindless. And like watching the television and binge watching is like you do that because you're trying to do something that releases and rests your mind from your day and from being very alert and focusing on things that you need to get done, right? And so maybe the solution is, instead of actually going on to Amazon, get out a paper catalog and flip a catalog for a little while. Like there's a whole lot of steps between looking at the catalog and you buying something that involve, cranking up the computer and making a phone call. And so maybe you can rest your mind with a catalog instead of with an online shopping experience. Maybe you want to recognize that it'd be better for me if I go read something mindless than to go shopping on Amazon, right? Like maybe you just need to substitute another mind resting activity. I saw somebody, my friend Karen this weekend whipped out her iPad and she pulled up this little thing that was, it was an app that you color by number. So she had a little stylus and she had this picture come up, and it was like an online coloring book basically, and it had a whole bunch of colors by number. And when you work on color number 1 first, and you would go and find the spaces that were color number 1 and go and tap them, and it would fill that color. And I'm like, why are you doing that? She's like, well, it's just, it's very relaxing. Okay, like it worked for her. And she sat over there and she wasted a half an hour going tap, 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 very quietly until this electronic picture was filled. And that was a soothing, relaxing thing to do. She wasn't shopping while she was doing that. She was playing with color. And that's why people play little games. Simon's Cat. Why you have little game apps on your phone? Because you're trying to do something
Minesweeper.
mindless. Minesweeper, right? Like you're trying to do something mindless. And so recognizing that if your mind relaxing behavior involves buying things, that perhaps that habit is one that is not conducive to clearing your space, and that instead you can substitute a different mind relaxing behavior that doesn't involve buying anything. That's what I'm saying. Oh my, y'all are really chatting down there.
Here's an interesting comment from Jessica, who's watching on Facebook.
Okay.
I am currently working on creating an inventory list of every cabinet and drawer, closet, etc. My CBT training is to carry the notebook everywhere. Having to carry the book actually halts me from shopping. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, gotcha. Hey, that's a good one. So carrying the notebook with the list in it helps interrupt your shopping. That's your impulse shopping. I mean, your unplanned shopping. That's awesome.
Unlisted, unbudgeted.
Unbudgeted, right? That's really great, because then you have to look at the list and go, yeah, it's not on the list. And then you have to constantly, tell yourself, I'm not going to buy what's on the list. That's good. That's a good solution.
Long before smartphones, my habit was to carry a tiny little notebook, like, I don't know, maybe a 4-inch by 2-inch ring bound notebook.
Yeah, little spiral notebook.
Spiral notebook. Spiral at the top edge because I'm left-handed, so the top
right?
top bound works better than side bound. And that was where all the lists went.
And then you carried it around?
I carried it in my pocket, and it got very dog-eared.
And beat up. But it worked, right? It was a low-tech solution, and it did the trick.
Well, and we're talking about habits. It's all about what can you sustain. So back on the topic of what kind of shopping list is going to work for you, it's the one that you will remember to take with you. The phone works great for me because the phone always goes with me.
Right? There was a time when we didn't have to carry our phones everywhere, but now I can't hardly walk out the room without finding out where my phone is. So
Right.
it is definitely a new attachment to our hip, and anything they can do to support you in your shopping habits would be super extra awesome. And maybe you just haven't explored it a little bit. Maybe you just, if you feel intimidated by the technology, it's time to call your grandkids. or everybody has a friend who's good at tech, right? Not everybody that you know is comfortable, but you have one friend who's good at it, and go visit them and say, hey, help me figure out how to do this in the phone, and let them teach you something. You can do it on Zoom if you're not seeing your friends right now. They can help you on Zoom, and you can show things on the screen and they can see it. It's totally worth it. I see they're talking about libraries now.
Yeah, and Denise mentioned the cash filter is really good advice. She said, I used to only take cash when I lived in Switzerland and went over the frontier to France to the supermarket, which was cheaper. I used to count up what I had spent as I went along and would find myself putting stuff back on the shelf. It was a good habit, and I might go back to that.
I think that, forcing yourself to use cash, and the corollary here is also that when you want to make big purchase, then you have to save the cash before you can buy it. And the credit cards tricked everybody into buying things they couldn't afford on the theory that they could pay for them over time. And boy, you do pay for them for sure. But it made it super easy for you to ignore your own inner advice about not buying outside of your means, not buying something you can't afford, because the credit card will let you buy whatever you want whenever you want it within some, scope that they determine your credit deserves. And you can completely jack yourself up that way. And carrying around cash, or not buying a new car until you have cash, or not buying the new appliance until you have the cash to pay for it, means you have to save for it over a long period of time. And then you really better want it, because if it takes you 6 months to save the money to go buy it, then it's going to be something that you really cared about, instead of something that you impulsively bought one day when you were going through the store, right? So 6 months later, if you still love that necklace, or you still love that new washing machine, or you still love that new deck chair, it's because you really, really wanted it and really found like it was a good idea. And so the cash filter, there's a reason why Dave Ramsey uses it in his, get in control of yourself process, because it makes a huge difference in what you buy and what you talk yourself out of buying.
Tammy asked about price comparison tools, and that's I don't know a lot about that. I know, there are apps you can put on your phone that will like scan the UPC code and look for the cheapest price anywhere.
And there's also price comparison things based on specific, here's the insurance comparison site, and here's the, specific item comparison site. But I'm not sure that I'm not familiar. I have to say that's not my area of expertise at all. Not sure.
Tammy also asked if we have information about rewriting your story, and that was the topic of story editing we covered in our video that was New Year's Eve, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Right? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And it referred to an article from Psychology Today, and I'll repeat that link in the notes for this when I put it on YouTube.
And basically the idea is that there is some psychological alteration support for, if you are wishing for something, if you want something new in your life, writing the story of your life with as if you have achieved or received or gotten what you were hoping for, accomplished. Writing it in that way helps your brain adjust to the idea of receiving it, and makes it there's some support for it helps you align to actually getting there. It helps you it improves your path to getting to that target. And so we talked a little bit about the psychology behind it and the process. And we did it in terms of decluttering. So we were talking about if you want to have a new and different space, if you want something to be better in your space, then writing the story as if you have achieved the dream, writing what your dream is about, writing how the dream space looks like in your head, is part of the process of helping you shift your behaviors towards that goal. And so that's what we were referencing earlier, that if you have trouble with changing those habits, then you want to edit your story to include the new habits that you want to make, the new automatic, I don't have to think about it things that you need to do in order to make your space more how you would like it. I thought the clothing one was perfect. Everybody comes home exhausted from work and they start shedding their clothes, and they end up on the floor or the bed or the chair or whatever, and they're in some kind of a pile. And it's a much better story to say, I put my clothes away at the end of the day while you're doing it. Like say the mantra, and this is how I do it, and then go and hang them up while you're saying it to yourself. And practice having it be that easy to get it done.
We've also talked before about tiny habits. There's a professor of psychology, I think his discipline is psychology, BJ Fogg, who has a website, tinyhabits.com, and there's a book, and he talks about cultivating new small habits by hooking them onto existing habits and triggers, using one thing that you do all the time to trigger another one. So you're trying to, terribly obvious example is if your dentist has told you to floss more, well then, when you go to brush your teeth, you floss first. If you already have the habit of brushing your teeth, you add flossing to that. And similarly, you walk in the door and you put your car keys in the dish, use that. If that's an established habit, use that as the trigger for another thing that's kind of relevant, that's connected or relevant. Like at that moment, my laptop bag goes in this slot on the desk.
Right. Or when you walk into the kitchen to take your lunch kit from work and you're bringing it back into the kitchen to put it in the sink, you use walking into the kitchen as a trigger to go stand at the trash can with the mail and process the mail and throw away the mail that you don't want, or recycle or shred or whatever, that you take the 5 minutes to handle the mail that you picked up on the way in. I use coming home at night, because I leave the house in the morning and go around and I'm out all day at appointments. And so I get lunch somewhere in the middle and I'm loading my car and unloading my car with people's stuff. It's going in and out all the time. And I end up with trash in the car. And so I make it a point of whenever I drive into the driveway and turn off the car, that's my time to pivot and look for the trash that needs to come in, because there's a trash can outside of my house that is sitting at the front by the garage door. And so I can take that trash out of my car immediately and go dump it in the trash before I even go in the house. And it's, in some days it's zero. Some days it's a bag with some stuff in it and I go throw that away. But I use that pulling into the driveway, which I have to do every day to go home, and getting out of the car is my trigger to look for trash. And it helps me keep my car clean, which annoys the crap out of me. I hate having a bunch of trash in the car. And so I have enough stuff in the car. I don't need my own trash in there with me.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you for final thoughts, but first, a couple of quick announcements. Okay. For those who are with us live, and there have been about 75 people with us live today.
Yay! Hi, everybody.
I want to remind you that Our YouTube channel contains more than 100 videos on lots of different organizing topics. We don't have our signs today, but go to cfhou.com/YouTube. While
see
you're
them
at
all.
YouTube, you can subscribe and click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to get notifications whenever we post something new on YouTube. Also, a reminder that you can support our projects through our Patreon page. That's cfhou.com/Patreon. Many thanks to the 10 people who've already started supporting us with monthly recurring donations of small amounts.
Kisses to
Also,
you. We love you.
also a reminder that you can hire Gayle. We have to put that in there once in a while. If you're in the
Yes, you
Houston
can.
area, Gayle can come and work with you one-on-one in person. If you're not in the Houston area, Gayle can still work with you one-on-one through virtual organizing sessions. Visit our website at clutterfairyhouston.com for all the details. We'll meet next Tuesday, September 22nd, same time, live in Zoom and streaming on Facebook. We'll continue this series on a decluttering philosophy, changing our relationship to stuff. We'll talk next week about ethical and environmental questions around clutter. What is the real cost of things? Are the people who make our stuff paid fairly and treated well? Are the items or materials sustainable? We're going to explore some of these bigger picture questions we might want to ask ourselves about what we collect and keep. Finally, if you're watching this on YouTube, we'd love for you to join us live. To get notifications about upcoming events, we invite you to join the meetup group by visiting cfhou.com/meetup. You can also follow us on Facebook by going to cfhou.com/Facebook. What are your final thoughts on this topic?
Here are my final thoughts. If you accept the premise that you want to change your relationship with stuff and improve your surroundings to something that's more pleasant to live in and easier to maintain, then you have to look at the habits you have that are in opposition to that goal. Taking a conscious look at the unconscious things you do that degrade your environment will help you see where you can make changes in support of your goal of a serene space. Pay attention to the small habits you can cultivate, the daily practices and new routines that can support your dream of an organized home and a fulfilling life, because that's what we want for you most of all.
We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions and topic suggestions in the YouTube comments on Facebook or anywhere else, and you can always reach us through our website at clutterfairyhouston.com.
Thanks everybody for coming. We so appreciate that you do every week, and we will see you next time. Bye. I see clapping hands. That's so lovely. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.